Okay, it's day 372 of the lockdown documentary that I've been making. That sounds too fake. So it's day 372 of my lockdown documentary, and I'm really excited because I'm back in the studio and I've got a guy coming in called Richard Scholar, who's from Durham University. And he's agreed to be part of the documentary. And he's going to do a piece, I think it's called Modern Keywords. Yeah, so we're going to be filming him here. And, well, it'd just be good to be filming a human being again. A human being, finally. Are you okay with me filming some of this for my lockdown documentary?
Fine, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, no. Be interesting to hear what that's all about. It must have been quite a period for you, I guess.
Oh, it's been hellish for everyone. You know, I'm getting back used to trying to use equipment, and I'm, forgetting how things work, and then just trying to have to.
Yeah. Are you actually recording now?
Yes. Hang on a minute, am I? Yeah. So that's recording.
Oh, okay. Keywords are terms and phrases that often crackle with a range of contradictory and contested meanings. Phrases like à la mode, and words like caprice, ennui, naivete have been widely available in English since the later part of the 17th century. They mark out things it can't immediately express, while also creating for it new possibilities of expression.
How's that?
That looks fantastic. If only you could make all my work look and sound as good as that. It would just be brilliant.
What else have you got? says desperate filmmaker.
Well, the thing that's on my mind actually at the moment is I've had this really nice invitation from the university to do an inaugural.
Oh, okay.
And I just don't really see how I can make it work
in
the time of COVID.
Can I just ask what an inaugural lecture? Sorry to sound stupid.
No, sorry, I should. Academic speak.
Yeah.
Well, an inaugural lecture is really a sort of ceremonial event to mark the arrival of a new professor. So obviously I've just turned up in Durham, and the usual thing is that you get together an audience in a nice lecture hall, a dignitary of the university, like the Vice Chancellor or something like that, introduces the new professor, and then the new professor gives a talk on a topic of their choosing, and then there's some sort of Q&A. I mean, I'd love to do a roundtable with colleagues, and then we all go off and have a glass of wine together in a cramped space.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have you along, but I can't really see how it's going to work at all with social distancing and all that stuff.
Yeah, I suppose, because you can't. Yeah, especially.
I mean, I could put it online in the form of yet another lecture on Zoom, like everything else I've done.
No, I mean, that's what I was actually just thinking. That I suppose you could. Have people done that before, like film their lectures?
Not that I've been aware of. I mean, I've done pretty much everything else online these last few minutes, except of course for sledging, and we all know how well that went.
Yeah, with your foot. Yeah,
broken ankle.
Jeez.
But I mean, the other thing is that Zoom fatigue just stalks everyone in the academic world. I mean, everyone in the world at the moment. So I don't know. I think I'll just leave the whole idea for now.
I mean, you could film it if you just did it like a little bit differently. Do you mean rather than just be, oh, hi, this is me, I'm not saying that what you talk about is boring, but do you know what I mean? If you actually just said...
Like all my Zoom lectures, you mean?
Yeah, but I think it is that fatigue, isn't it? In all, they were saying about that filmmaking without a camera, that I was helping those artists out, and they were sending me footage, and then I was I wasn't directing them, they chose what they shot, but I was just helping them out with basic rules, like, don't hold it, hold it landscape, not portrait. So because most people like to watch things in the letterbox format, that's what we're used to watching things in. Mm-hmm. Don't film yourself in front of a window, where you just get this sort of silhouette like in Crime Watch. Make sure you've actually got it in focus. Yeah, I know these are like basic things, but the number of and make sure the sound is good. The number of times people just don't think about it, and they wobbling around with their camera, and you just actually say keep it still. Get a nice close-up, get a nice mid-shot, get a wide shot of things, cut away to things. This is the thing. It's
how do you do that then?
Well, I mean, with what we're going to be doing tomorrow, so I'm going to come to you and film, I can't film you writing. I can't film the writing process other than, you know, a sort of quill and ink on parchment or something like that. It's so the number of times I've filmed writers and it's just, you know, the finger shots of them typing.
Oh, you mean for the early monkey?
Yeah, exactly. So it's well, they call B-roll, cutaway, whatever, and it just adds stuff. It's like in the same way that we cut away from you there from one camera to another. It doesn't. You don't have to do it as one long I'm scared in front of the camera type thing. You can actually think it through, shoot it from different angles, and most people can do it. It's not a black art as it used to be.
Oh, I'll give that a bit of thought. I mean, just thinking on my feet, I'm sure there'd be a bit of budget if. I mean, inaugural lectures tend to be filmed, don't they?
Right.
And there would probably be a bit of budget if you'd be.
Well, you know, I mean, I might know someone who might be able to help you out if you. not that I need the work or anything like that.
So it's day 373 of my lockdown diary. I've just leaving my studio up there in Commercial Union House and heading out to this Agnes Varda. I'm heading to the metro and then I'm going to get the train over to Durham to see Richard Scholar, who apparently has been working on his own video diary, so I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Right, let's see if I can get some space in which to think. Oh, hold on a minute.
Sorry for offending your delicate eardrums.
Alright, upstairs we go.
I was in the middle of a lecture. You've just interrupted me in the middle of a lecture.
I'm really sorry. Alan was talking to me about some of the techniques yesterday. I thought I'd give it a go. Oh, but hold on, I'm pointing the wrong way here. Okay, I think I've got it the right way around this time. At least I'm pointing the right way, but I think it should be like this, shouldn't it? Okay, so first thing that's on my mind is just really good news from, I had a phone call from Elizabeth Orpass at IMEMS to say that she thinks she's found a potential venue for the inaugural when the time comes to do it. That's the assembly rooms in the centre of the city, so that's great. I think, I need to give the whole idea of an inaugural lecture some proper thought. The conditions at the moment are really not favourable at all. I mean, COVID is obviously just causing all sorts of just complications and restrictions. As for Brexit, n'en parlons pas. And then there's my bust ankle to contend with. So, ankle, Brexit, COVID, and that's quite an ABC spelling doom to any prospects that I might have for, you know, gathering friends and colleagues here in Durham, standing on my 2 feet and delivering to them any kind of lecture. Setting aside for a moment the practical challenges of an inaugural, what would I want to say anyway, at this point in the transit of life and work? I find myself as if hobbling through a shadowy dell. The winding road has disappeared from view. I follow instead, as we all must, the all too straight and narrow path of life in lockdown. Yet, an inaugural lecture ought to be a temporary release from the straight and narrow. A moment for me to consider the winding road travelled so far, and a chance to celebrate the kind of work that I've learnt to value and that I hope to teach my students to value. What is it all for? I'd be happy, as a starting point, to look outwards from the vantage point of the words I've recently written about. I'd want to make it clear that words matter to me, not as self-sufficient objects, but for the stories they tell of what it is to live a human life in history, and for the role they play in the making of concepts, practices, and forms in and across cultures. The truth is that I'm endlessly fascinated by these interactions, particularly as these are found in literature, which shapes and is shaped by language, of course, in unique ways. The word that Alan and I were discussing, caprice, is a precious example of how words interact with concepts, practices and forms in literature and its sister arts. Caprice is used, often depreciatively, of a giddy thought, an ill-formed child of an overactive imagination that deviates from the straight and narrow path of reason. It comes in this way positively to name an entire culture of irregular creativity. Montaigne anticipates this development as he anticipates so many others in his essay. He uses the word caprice towards the end of the chapter that he devotes to the erratic and erotic power of the imagination. He confides self-deprecatingly to his reader that the giddy conceit underlying the entire chapter, or as he puts it, the caprice of it, came to him when a Swiss apothecary who worked for his late father recently told him a story. Et tout ce caprice m'est tombé présentement en main. I love that phrase. The improvised, found, present-to-hand quality that it describes and possesses. Montaigne here lets it be known that the unruly powers of the capricious imagination are not the mere object of his essaying in this chapter. They've prompted the essaying in the first place. They're at work in the manner and matter of the writing. They are the meandering of literature as much as its destination.
You okay? You alright with those?
Yeah, actually, the ankles, it is a bit sore.
Yeah?
Do you mind if I have a,
no worries, no worries.
a little sit down?
Sorry, I just dragged you around.
That's all right.
Durham.
No problem at all.
Yeah? Okay. I'll just put the camera down.
Okay.
So have you actually worked out what you're going to say?
In the inaugural?
Yeah.
So I thought I might talk about my next project, which is early modern utopianism. And in some ways, you know, a word like utopia travels around the place a bit like those words we were talking about yesterday. So in the case of utopia, it's actually a word that carries with it all of the shock of the old. It's a Greek word being brought into Latin and travelling all around the place. Then it comes to describe an entire culture of early modern invention. In the case of utopia, it's an invention of all sorts of alternative, better worlds, you know, worlds in which all things, including vaccines, are held in common. Worlds in which an assault on a woman is punished more severely than an assault on a statue. And a world in which everybody recognises that Black Lives Matter.
So you're sort of straying a little bit there from utopianism.
It's in the nature of the utopia that it travels and it strays.
Right.
And as a critic, if you're going to stay with it, you need to stray with it.
To be honest, it reminds me a bit more of what you were talking about yesterday, Caprice.
Yeah, I mean, Caprice is another of these complex and also contested words. I mean, Caprice travels around in the company of its Italian equivalent Capriccio, but it's used in all kinds of different ways. It becomes a name, the name of a person of either gender. It's used to name objects, objects like this scarf, a wavy, broad ribbon scarf. It's even used to name forces in nature. So anything in nature that sort of breaks out of the straight line is a caprice. I mean, what could be more capricious, you might say, than the River Wear in Durham, breaking into a meander and creating thereby the peninsula on which the city is built. So there's a whole nature to Caprice, but there's also nurture. And there again, Caprice is contested. So a secular-minded writer like Montaigne sees in Caprice an opportunity to celebrate art in the making, in the here and now. Whereas an ardent Christian writer like Pascal, who disagrees so much with Montaigne, sees Caprice as a snare and a delusion. So take, for example, what
Pascal says about Caprice. He makes Caprice identical with imagination as a whole. He says that the imagination is constantly luring humans to their doom. It's a mistress of error and falsehood, all the more misleading for not always being misleading. Maîtresse d'erreur et de fausseté d'autant plus fourbe qu'elle ne l'est pas toujours. And yeah, I mean, in that way, of course, Pascal is, even as he says this, using the Caprice. He's using all of the resources of the imagination to convince his reader of the truth of this argument against Caprice that he's making.
I wonder who knocked that bin over. It just reminds me of Patrick Keeler. I mentioned about that London.
Yeah,
London.
You did,
yeah.
A film essay, you called it.
Yeah, a film essay, which it transformed how I saw films, how films can be made. It was totally against the sort of Hollywood approach. Just the idea of disconnecting the image from the story, and then the way that you reconnect it yourself. I'm sure most people would watch London and say it's bloody boring, but there's something in it for me that I find quite consoling. When Keeler made this film, apparently, he just went around London and just plonked his camera wherever, just looking for interesting shots. And you never know what's going to happen. You never know when a bin's going to get knocked over, or you basically capture a moment. It's not staged, and yet the story is probably been the story written before the image, and it's capricious. Because you're going out and you're capturing these things that you don't quite know what's going to happen. Anything could happen, and then it's there, and then from then you make a story, or do you take a story and then add imagery? I don't know. I mean, I've done films in the past. I did a film called Dad's Dog, which was just I captured random images and then strung them together and came up with a story based around what I saw. But then actually, as I came up with the story, I then realised I needed to put bits in it to make the story make more sense. So, in a way, it was scripted, and I...
You were finding it as you went along?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to see it. I'm going to watch it tonight.
Well, you need to give me that. You need to give me that DVD. What was it, Richard?
Richard Strauss's Capriccio, the opera he made out of Caprice.
Right.
I'd love you to see that. Okay, right.
I'll need to set more stuff up. So.
Right. Here we go. Return, and I'm writing. Yeah. Really sorry about the Zoom call. It's just really useful to talk to him,
Yeah. Totally.
About how it might work. So I'll just open it up if that's okay.
Yeah, no, it's right. I mean, I'll just get set up whilst you chat to. I mean, how long you can you want me to?
No, 5 minutes.
Right,
okay.
Right, I'm just going to change this light over.
Stuart, I think are you unmuted?
Richard, thanks very much for taking this call. I just wondered if we could sort out one or two things ahead of your inaugural.
Sure.
So, Capri in the time of COVID, that's the island, is it, not the car?
Well, I ought to be lecturing about both of those, but no, actually, I think there's probably been a typo in one of the emails. It's not the Capri. It's actually Caprice. So the French word Caprice and all of it that it carries with it.
So that's the singer and ex-model, the chanteuse. Then is it? That's the languages connection.
I need to. Well, I probably need to find a place for her too.
It's neither of those things. Then it's more capriciousness and.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Okay. Sorry, my phone's just going here, Richard.
Oh, yeah. No, don't worry. No problem.
Hello? Yeah, I will sort it in a minute, yeah, thanks. Sorry.
Just get some finger shots for us.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Sorry, my dogs are barking apparently and disrupting the neighbourhood. I'll have to deal with that later. So sorry. Where were we?
Dogs
We're sorting out the inaugural then.
Well, it's a bit of a pipe dream at the moment for obvious reasons, but it's great to be able just to start thinking about how it all might work and obviously where you might fit into it.
It might be an idea of maybe I have a go at sort of pre-recording an introduction. I mean, you can see that I'm appropriately dressed. This is how I usually sit in my office, Richard. But I could put on a gown or something to make it look a bit more official. Would it be helpful to get something maybe in the tank now?
Great. Well, it'd be great to hear what you might say. Yeah, and quite. I mean, it'd be a while since you dusted your gown off.
Just a minute.
Can I just get a finger on the mouse shot?
Yeah, sure.
No,
finger on the mouse, yeah?
So
just click it, shall I?
Yeah, just move it around so it just makes it look as if you're, really working hard on your writing.
There we go, clicking.
Right then,
Is that all right?
Richard. Well, I mean, ordinarily, of course, I'd be in a lecture theatre or the assembly rooms and I'd be standing to introduce you, but maybe we could do something sitting down and sort of run it by you and see how that would work. It's always a bit difficult because I need to look at camera and you're sort of slightly to the left of centre, so I'm going to look at the camera now much more clearly. So I think what I'd probably say is, how nice it is to be the Vice-Chancellor and Warden, be able to introduce an inaugural lecture. This is for Richard Scholar, our chair in French, and I know that this is an event that has the warm support of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, the School of Modern Languages and Cultures, and the Institute of Medieval and Modern Studies. And for somebody like myself, product of the 1980s as a young academic, inaugurals were a big thing. We used to go hundreds of miles to take part in inaugurals, and then they rather faded away. So it's a great opportunity, Richard, to be able to do something online, perhaps, or ideally back in the assembly rooms. And then I think what I would say after that is something about yourself. Now, my understanding is that you are, particularly on your mother's side, a child of the Northeast, a product of the Northeast, a proud member of the Northeast. Your undergraduate and doctoral work, though, was at the University of Oxford. You then began your academic career, if I remember correctly, at this university before moving south again to Oxford, first a lectureship and then a professorship in French and comparative literature. And what a distinguished career you've had. And I know that as we speak, or pretty soon I assume, Richard, you'll be taking up your Leverhulme Major Research Fellowship for 3 years, I think from 2021 to 2024, to write on the topic of the inventions of utopia. Get that in. Probably should reference at least one of your 3 major books. I think I'd go for 2020 Princeton University Press, the book Émigrés, French Words That Turned English. And then, you have to remember that I've worked mainly in India, not in France. My French was bad even when I was a schoolboy. I'd have a go at referencing the fact that in 2008, which is quite a long time ago, extraordinary achievement, in 2008 you were made a Chevalier dans l'Ordre des Palmes Académiques by the French government after already having a Philippe Leverhulme Prize. And of course, you will be speaking to us in a reference, I assume, to that great Latin American novelist about Caprice in the time of COVID. And over to you. Something like that?
Couldn't be better, Stuart, and I'm really touched and honoured by what you've said. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. And
thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Okay, I'll just end that. Alan, sorry about that.
No, it's
back to.
I understand. No, it's fine. What is
it?
You don't need to apologise. It's fine.
Mouse.
I've got a mouse.
Some more of this.
Fingers. Yeah, I wouldn't mind a bit of QWERTY actually. I think people really respond well when they see shots of those keys being pressed in specifically.
Okay, and then a 5, I think.
Being pressed.
9. Okay.
Just really focus it. Almost as if you're really in the process.
Reading a really interesting document here.
Yeah.
Email or something.
No, remember you were meant to be writing.
Oh, I'm writing. Yeah, of course, I'm a writer.
I don't know what your writing face is, but you could put your writing face on.
Okay, right, here we go.
Okay, so, and writing, go. Yeah, could you raise your eyebrow just a little bit?
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I want to sort of just get a sense of the struggle, do you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, well it is difficult, I'm telling you.
Where do these ideas come from? I think that's all we need. Stop there.
Oh, yeah, I'm just struggling up here.
The main thing is it looks good, Richard. That's the main priority. I'm sorry if you're pain. But anyway, yeah.
Be my guest. So I was saying that, yes, in time, first in French and then in English, Caprice comes to name an entire culture of imaginative and irregular creativity in which artists working in various media painters, composers, poets all collaborate and compete with one another. The late 17th century French dictionary maker Antoine Furetière, when he defines the word, says of caprice that it's used of pieces of poetry, music and painting that succeed thanks to the power of wit, rather than through observance of the rules of art, and which have no settled name.
It sounds very controversial.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, Furetière is putting caprice into the vocabulary of the 17th century moderns in their quarrel with the ancients. So caprice is a modern name for a modern attitude that takes the narrow and straight lines of classically inherited forms and bends them wittily out of shape. Capricious artists of the century are using caprice to varying ends, some of them light, some of them dark, but what they're all doing is drawing attention to the illusion that they're creating, and it's an illusion of improvisational freedom. And they're doing that not just to congratulate themselves on their artistry, but to test out their artistry on a knowing public that is able to, if you like, value deviation from the rules rather than from sage observance of the rules. So capricious art is in that sense always self-reflective art. The capricious line is a straight line bent knowingly into a wavy line. The knowingness is all.
Okay, great. Yeah, a bit of wind on that, but that should be okay. Brilliant. So I suppose what you're saying is, in order to know a caprice, you have to make a caprice.
That's exactly right, and that's what artists have been doing ever since the 17th century.
17th century. Okay, so what kind of artists?
Well, I mean any number, but the dictionary maker I mentioned, Antoine Furetière, at the end of the 17th century, he mentions 3 examples of capricious artists in France. So you've got in poetry Saint-Amand, in the visual arts you have the engraver and etcher Jacques Callot, and in music, well, Furetière doesn't name any names in music, but he says simply there are caprices in music. I wrote about this in Émigrés.
Okay, so if you can just lie like that and sort of pretend to go to sleep.
That won't be
I'll just get a few shots.
Won't be difficult.
Oh, that's my feet. Hang on a minute. Where are you? There you are.
Jacques Callot first published in Florence in 1617 a series of 50 small etchings entitled Capricci di varie figure. These were a combination of disparate themes, including cityscapes and battle scenes, all of them visual performances of Callot's powers of design and execution. To etching, a medium that enabled rapidity of execution, Callot appeared to bring an equal rapidity of capricious invention. 2 years after Callot published his capricious etchings, in 1619, the German composer Michael Pretorius observed of the caprice in music that one can add, take away, digress, turn and direct the music as one wishes, but while one is not bound strictly by the rules, one ought not to go too much out of the mode. This observation sets a pattern for the caprice across media. The caprice, as the art historian David Rosand has put it, will be based upon the very compositional conventions that it undermines. The poet of caprice named by Furetière, Saint-Amand, uses his caprices to subvert poetic conventions in just this way. Saint-Amand uses the word caprice as a title under which to gather a combination of disparate themes, including a failed melon crop, a sleepless night in grotty lodgings, the pungent delights of Cantal cheese, a naval battle that didn't happen, the return to fashion of a poetic faun, the lameness of his horse, the relaxing powers of wine, the joy of cider, the risible spectacle of Rome, the pain of venereal disease, and the perfidy of Albion. Saint-Amand, like Callot, foregrounds the ingenuity of manner involved in this capricious combination of themes. Yet Saint-Amand is working with word, not image, and with the poetic line rather than the graphic line. He, the poet, must find other means of drawing the eye of the beholder to the caprice, to the invention that lies behind the title of his poems. He varies the length of his poetic line. He mixes forms into surprising combinations.
He creates caprices within caprices. He does this by rapidly passing from one mode to another. Oh, Alan, we're here.
Oh, cool.
Masks on. I'll just... The Neve, the cleaner, should be ready to open up to us, I hope. Hi, are you Neve?
I am, yes, hi.
Oh, great, I'm Richard.
Oh, yes, Kate said to expect you. Just want to come in.
Thank you very much indeed, it's great. I've not been in this place since it was refurbished, so I'm really looking... Thanks a lot, cheers. Oh, wow. I suppose I can take my mask off in here now. Quite theatrical, isn't it? Since, you know, I suppose it could work.
It's always good to be in a theatre that feels theatrical, I always feel.
Well, spoken like a truth graduate of, what was it, English and Drama Study?
I think that's what it was.
Yeah. It's not in totally perfect tune, but why not? So, I mean, of course, capricious music has flourished, has had that eerily long history that Caprice has had in literature and the arts. I mean, think of Bach in the 17th century, which I was just talking about the 17th century, but then it goes, the capricious mode music goes all the way up through, Chopin, Dvorak, all the way up to Delius and Strauss. You know, I lent you that DVD the other of Strauss's Capriccio, which is obviously exactly that, a caprice. I mean, what's he doing?
In what way is it caprice? What do you mean?
Well, he's bringing together all of the work he did, all of his musical career to date. He's thinking about the relationship between words and music. Okay, so it's got one of those ridiculous plots that operas have. The poet and the composer are both in love with this countess, this aristocratic lady in late 18th century France, and the way they express their rivalry for her hand is to disagree about which of their arts is more important. So which comes first? Is it the words or is it the music? They quarrel on stage about all of this. The countess tries to work out what she's going to do. It's her birthday, so they're trying to organise some kind of celebration. That's where the rivalry comes into it, and there's a theatre director waiting to bring them together. But it's actually the countess's brother, who's no fan of opera. It's part of one of the jokes, you know, who provides the solution. So he says, "Why don't you all work together and make an opera? But make an opera about what's happened today. Take the conflicts in your experience, the things that have happened this afternoon, write them, perform them, and make them an opera." So anyway, that's what happens. The poet, the composer, and the theatre director get together, and they disappear to prepare the work. Supper is served. The countess leaves the stage empty and the curtain falls. Capriccio is concluded in the only way it could. The opera's found no ending, but we've just heard it in the making. And along the way, Strauss has composed a kind of brief history of opera while foregrounding his own contribution to that history by recycling, reworking some of his most beautiful themes. What could be more capricious? Caprices developed in music, in poetry and in painting in the 17th century, but I think it's Strauss who really brought these together in a new way in Capriccio. Strauss was advertising the power of opera as a modern art form by showing that it was a home for all the capricious arts of early modern Europe. But he could only do so, of course, by recycling on the operatic stage the short pieces of theatre about theatre that Molière had made famous in the 17th century. These are witty conversational pieces of theatre about theatre itself, which early modern companies stage as an accompaniment to the evening's main billing. Molière followed his brilliant and controversial comedy L'École des Femmes, for example, with a short conversational piece in which the protagonists have just seen his play, L'École des Femmes, and they then discuss their reactions to it. So,
what are their reactions?
Well, I mean, some of them love it, some of them hate it, and there's a clever defence developed in the course of the play. So what does all of that mean? Well, it means that Molière has written a play that's wittily deviating from the conventions of mainstream theatre of his day. It's a play that obviously can't end in the tragic downfall of one of the characters. It can't end in the comic resolution of a wedding. How's it going to end? Well, it can only end with the announcement that supper is served. But supper is served and the tea comes on only after the playwright's taken the opportunity to reply to his critics and to advertise his powers of theatrical invention.
So when you actually do this, are you going to read it off a piece of paper? Is that how you deliver an inaugural lecture? So you will read it, you won't learn it and do it?
Yeah.
It's not like a theatre performance?
No.
Okay.
Okay, thanks very much, Kate. All right, here we go.
So what was that line? Take all the happenings of this art. What was the line in the thing?
Take the happenings of this afternoon, all that occurred here today, write it and perform it.
Good advice from the Count.
Yeah. I mean, of course, as long as something's actually happened.
Well, I mean, it's good to see the space.
Yeah, and it will be wonderful when the time comes. In the meantime...
Go and get a cup of tea.
Yeah.
that was pure gold, Richard. You and Alan have really managed to work some alchemy in turning COVID collateral damage into a late postmodern happening. I only fear that inaugural lectures will never be the same afterwards. You've also set a really high bar for Act Two, the Roundtable, which, if I'm not mistaken, we caught a glimpse of as an empty dais at that final scene of Act One. Anyway, perhaps you could get us rolling by introducing your four friends and colleagues, myself included, who are going to join you and Alan to make up the cast of characters for Act Two.
Well, thank you, Kathy, and thanks to all of you for meeting me to discuss my work in this improvised setting. Roland in Stanford, Frédérique in Paris, Michael in Cambridge, and Kathy in New York. Roland, you and I have been engaged in a parallel journey in the study of words as an approach which, as you put it so well in your 2013 study, 5 words, and I'm quoting you now, this is one of your sentences that I've lived with and travelled with, an approach that reacquaints us with literature as advanced, speculative thinking about the world we live in. The words you study are connected to conceits, to images and to objects, and they're complex in meaning. As you say of one of your 5 words, invention, and I'm quoting you again, the tension built into the word does not compromise its meaning. It is that meaning. Frédérique, we were Oxford colleagues for a time, and you communicated to me during that time, and you've communicated to me since, the value of intellectual and creative community. An important word for you, I think, is the word shared. And in particular, you argue completely successfully in your work that literary forms and conceptual ideas, including scientific ones, belong to what you call a shared imagination, or as Tony Nuttall might have put it, a common sky. So you show how the fictions of cosmos that you wrote about back in 2012, and I'm quoting you here, invite us to perceive the richness of the literary found beyond the institutional boundaries of literature. I view that sentence of yours as both inspiration and challenge. Michael, I've been reading your work since I was a graduate student, and I've taken many things from it, but I take, perhaps most of all today, I take from it now as I did then, as a graduate student, I mean, the fundamental idea that the arguments of an early modern French thinker like Pascal deserve our attention, not merely for antiquarian purposes, but as arguments. And if we pay attention to these arguments in this way, as you do, and as you said back in 2003, we can hope to read these authors in a kind of precarious contact between our present and theirs. Kathy, I could quote many of the sentences in your 2012 book, The Renaissance Rediscovery of Intimacy, which I discovered as I was getting to know you. You show in that book how the intimacy rediscovered by the Renaissance has all but captured the entire field of literary expression, and that the intimacy was first and foremost a question of style. I'm quoting you now, a style that determines the reading and writing practices of the period. But also, I observe, a style that shapes the way in which you too read and write, which explains why so many of your sentences travel with me and keep me company.
First of all, I want to say how pleased I am to be able to join you on this occasion, Richard, to celebrate your appointment and to celebrate Émigrés, which I think is an extraordinary achievement. 2 or 3 years ago, I wrote an informal essay about what I tried to imagine as a taxonomy of semantic criticism. I wrote it online, published it online, and it can be found on my website, Arcade, arcade.stanford.edu. You just do a search on there for the title of the essay, which is What is Semantic Criticism? And in that piece, I proposed that there are 3 or 4 types of semantic criticism. There's one that I called axial, which is reading along an axis that may be vertical or horizontal. the example I used of a sort of deep reading along a vertical axis of a single word at a time was William Empson in The Structure of Complex Words, whereas the example of a wide horizontal reading would be a lot of recent scholarship emerging out of the digital humanities these days using corpora. The second instance would be a philological reading in which the critic finds a loose semantic thread and tugs on it until it yields up its secrets in a sort of more old-fashioned philological way. And examples of this might be C.S. Lewis in Studies in Words, or Leo Spitzer in some of his famous essays. And a third type would be historicist, a la Raymond Williams and Richard Scholar, concerned with words or concepts that embody historical periods or encode historical change. There's a fourth type, which, in my view, which would be what I tried to do in the book that you mentioned, called 5 Words, which I envisioned at the time as what I called a critical semantics of not keywords, but what I call working words. That is, the words that people live and think with, as opposed to those that more self-consciously represent the period. And I conceive that working words are so multivalent that we don't necessarily see the shape in their semantics, nor do they always seem to tell a common story. Now, one built-in danger of a historicist approach, which not even Williams avoids entirely, is tautology, telling us a story about a period that we already know and a story that is already latent in our basic awareness of the word. And what I want to pay tribute to here is your success, Richard, in Émigrés, in not only neutralizing this risk, but fashioning a trans-historical historicism. The strengths of the project are so much in the foreground that they tend to obscure how risky it really is. In someone else's hands, Émigrés could have been unmanageable. I continually marveled at how the restoration material comes alive and how the readings of fiction such as Edgeworth and Bowering say only what is needed for the project's focus and no more. In a just world, this book would become a paradigm, almost a franchise for similar studies comparing cultures through a restricted vocabulary out of which broad themes emerge. But of course, further books with the same approach would have to demonstrate Richard's lightness of touch, which is hard to imagine.
As for me, I would like to react to the wonderful lecture film we have just seen. And I would like to start with the end. The last shot, as you remember, is a traveling shot over the empty seats of a lecture hall, but also empty seats of a theater. And for me, it really encapsulates the strangeness, the sadness, and maybe the uniqueness of the year and collective experience we've been through. I guess I was also very moved because this is exactly the very last scene of my last theatre play that I've just finished 2 weeks ago. So we had the same idea, Richard, in a way. And maybe this coincidence says something about our time, about our capacity to think and to create collectively beyond borders. So this film is a making of a Caprice, and I would say, in a way, an éloge paradoxal for our time. Because rather than lamenting what the present situation does not allow us to do, the film explores all the possibilities which are offered by the time, but also by the genre itself. And we today are invited to do a kind of caprice, to overcome the impossibilities of our situation, to play with our tools. So bringing together colleagues from all over the world for a few minutes, but also wearing a strange jacket that I had bought for grandes occasions, but never dared to wear before today. And above all, reflecting on the meaning of our profession, of our métier, in a world where literature, research, and the arts seem to be the last of the priorities. So Richard, you invited us to reflect on the meaning of the word caprice. In modern French, as you know very well, caprice is far from having the refined, subtle, and profound meaning that you traced. Faire un caprice is to make a whim or to make a fuss, when a child makes a fuss to get something unreasonable. And Alan, by the way, if you can hear or see me, I might try to faire un caprice. Maybe you could correct my strange English and turn it into a well-pronounced, elegant English with the right accent and everything. I know you can do wonders. In the history of science and in the context of early modern natural philosophy, the term caprice is most often used to refer to prodigies, wonders, or even monsters. The caprice of nature refer to its erring ways or even its errors. In this regard, actually, it would be very interesting to trace the different destiny of the term in the field of science and art, as you do very well. And in fact, we can notice something quite interesting. Why the term is promised a fortune of several centuries in music, literature, painting, as you tell us, and it refers to a culture of invention and creativity, it is used, to my knowledge, in science only in the precise context of the prodigies and wonders of nature, and most often in a negative sense. So, in fact, until the 17th century, it was only of interest to lovers of cabinet de curiosité. But then it disappears completely from scientific texts when it was, when the aim was to find laws, les lois de la nature, and regularities. So in any case, what is interesting in this comparison is that there is a subversive force in the word caprice. There is a taste for deviation, for invention, for improvisation, which is totally forbidden to us today. And this is perhaps what is particularly moving about this film lecture. It's a reflection on the concept that establishes freedom as a principle and imagination as a method, which are the things we lack so much today. I remember that the first time I met your work, you were finishing a book about the je ne sais quoi. For a French speaker, there is a new, unknown joy in hearing a French word studied again. It's a way to rediscover it entirely. It's a way to look at it again in all its strangeness. So suddenly the words you've been studying as émigrés, you know, they become gems. They were banal words and they are transformed into precious stones by the interest given to them by another language. So this is a gift, and thank you so much for that gift. I would say that it requires a taste for words, for their history, for their own adventure, which I believe is one of the characteristics and maybe one of the beauties of our discipline, the study of literature. Émigrants, as your title say, these words travel in space, but also in time. And as Roland said, there is this beauty in the way you study not only traveling in space, but also traveling through history. And the way you show that words are vehicles for our common culture. They are witnesses, arches, and as Montaigne would say, maybe coches. And this is really what your work has taught me, an extreme attention to the capacity of words to carry with them sections of our culture, of our history. But what is true of words is also true of people. I was myself an émigrant for 12 years. Now that I am back in France, in Paris, I can say that it was in England that I rediscovered a taste for the French language, that it was in England that I met colleagues who were passionate enough to organize for years an informal reading group in which we were reading and commenting on all of Montaigne's essay, one after the other. It was in this amazing little group that I had the pleasure of meeting you, Richard. So you would say, why spend our lunches reading and discussing Montaigne? Well, pour le plaisir et par pur caprice.
I want to echo so much that the first two speakers have said. On Sunday evening, I was watching television and I was watching the final of the BBC Young Musician of the Year competition, which was won by a young Chinese musician who is playing the marimba very frequently with 3 mallets in each hand. And actually, that rather reminds me of what Richard has done in Émigrés, his capacity to sort of combine, to strike the target with perfect precision, a very multiple target. It's a fabulous demonstration of the power of comparative word history. And I think, over and above that, I mean, it just shows, in a sense, that monoglot word history, inevitably fails. It's a very powerful study of the otherness in English culture, not the non-English in English culture. And of course, it couldn't be more timely. At the beginning of the film, you evoked, alongside the broken ankle and the COVID situation, you invoke Brexit, as it were. And it's almost inevitable. I hope it's not too predictable to mention it here, but this study, this sense of how English culture has always grown by incorporating and sometimes reacting against its others is very powerful. And one of the things is, besides the strengths of the book, is the way in which it's not just French, that a word like caprice is also an Italian word or a Spanish word, and they too are part of the history of this word. I thought that the way you demonstrated the link between caprice, the notion of caprice, and self-reflexive art was incredibly suggestive, and of course magnificently enacted in the film itself, which obviously reminded one of Strauss, but it reminded me also of Molière's L'Impromptu de Versailles, of course, the play about being unable to put on a play. And over and above these sort of general points, there are a couple of particular lines of thought that the film and the book inspired in me apropos of Caprice. And one of them concerns Pascal's use of Montaigne, which you mentioned early on in the film. As you said, Pascal is suspicious of the imagination, of fantasy and so on. And one of the relevant passages is from the reflection on justice, where he said, if we really knew what justice was, legislators would not have taken as their model les fantaisies et les caprices des Perses et Allemands, the fancies and caprices of the Persians and Germans. That's lifted from Montaigne, the Apologie de Raymond Sebon. But curious, it's a very, very close echo. Ce ne serait pas de la fantaisie des Perses ou des Indes qu'à la vertu prendrait sa forme, says Montaigne. So the word caprice is actually injected there by Pascal to emphasize the point. And the second sort of point I had was you mentioned a very fruitful line of inquiry, where you spoke of the way in which caprice belongs to those pejorative terms by which authoritative, adult males marginalize other categories like children, and Frédérique mentioned children when talking about the use of caprice in modern French, artists and women. And a rather striking example of this, a much more modern example, and this shows how your historicism is transhistorical, as Roland said, which is Vardin's 1961 film Cléo de Saint-Cassette, where there's a whole scene where the musicians come and visit Cléo to get her to rehearse. And almost the first thing the pianist says is, quel est ce nouveau caprice? She's associated with caprice. She's early been associated with being like a child. And then when she says something he objects to, he says, encore un caprice, yet another caprice. And Cléo spots the word and protests about it. Caprice, caprice, you're always talking about caprice. It's you lot that have made me une capricieuse. So there's a kind of interpersonal gender dynamic associated with the word. And I find it really striking that Vardin brings out something that you brought out very clearly about the early modern period. And my other example from the early modern period is wondering whether that kind of behavior can be seen as a sort of defense mechanism or a response to social conditioning or social discourses. There's a bit in Clélie where Madeleine de Scudéry's long romance Clélie, and this is one of the discussions with which the romance is full. And this is a sort of men's discussion. The women just seem to be listening to it, as distinct from one of the discussions that where Clélie or one of the other women is the leader. And it's a discussion of female types. One of the men, the opprobrious, well, the rapist Sextus, the future rapist Sextus, asks what kind of woman is most rewarding to love. Is it a playful one who is enjouée? Is it a melancholic one? Or is it the third type of woman who is fière et capricieuse? Okay. And again, one wonders whether what Madeleine de Scudéry is getting at, you know, through the screen of the kind of male connoisseurship, the conversation of male connoisseurs, is Caprice as a pattern of female behavior that's a response to the gendered situation in which women find themselves in. You know, an alternative strategy, if you like, from being playful and cheerful so that everyone will be fond of you, or melancholic so that people will leave you alone. So those are two very sort of minor examples of the way in which which illustrate, I think, the fertility of your choice of terms. And you have thought so profoundly about these terms. You have inspired other people to sort of prolong your thought in this conversation. And thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to take part in it.
In the spirit of the friendly rivalry of Strauss's opera Capriccio that Richard features in Act 1, I thought that I would use my few minutes to take a little bit of exception to the last 5 words of Richard's wonderful new book, which concludes, and I'm quoting the last 5 words, "We have been here before." If we have, I would counter, we certainly didn't get here from there, by which I mean over scholarly hilltops that are fit only for the most sure-footed goats. For Émigrés is a capricious book, an inventive, norm-breaking book, full of high-wire acts connecting early modern dramas to postmodern novels, English to Italian, French, German, Spanish, and Caribbean Creole. More to the point, every connection that Richard makes constitutes what someone else, like him in love with language, called a callida iuntura, a skillful juxtaposition, one that takes us by surprise, but turns out to be just right. And in a moment, I will return to this someone else. Émigrés is also, in the Stoic sense, a cosmopolitan book, bounded like the cosmopolis by an oikumene, the places that people call home. In this root, keyword sense, Émigrés is an ecumenical book, but it does more than simply celebrate the mixing of here and there. It demonstrates the renewed artistic possibilities enabled by such mixings, such creolizations. And it does so even while giving a hearing to foreign words that resist assimilation, that act as so-called cells of resistance, which is Richard's term. This peculiar status of unassimilated foreignness, Richard tells us, is advocated, perhaps not surprisingly, by the German Jewish critical theorist Theodor Adorno in his 1959 essay, Words from Abroad, in the original German Wörter aus der Fremde. In one of his many skillful juxtapositions, Richard pairs Adorno with John Evelyn, member of the Royal Society, who, like Adorno, reverts to the complex relations between Greeks and Romans to make a point that Frédérique referred to just a few minutes ago, to make the point that words are like people, a point Richard reprises at the end of the book in a poignant plea for what Shakespeare called the stranger's case. But Greeks and Romans play only supporting roles in Richard's book. And as I relaxed into reading it, I kept looking back over my shoulder to classical antiquity, especially while reading the chapter on Caprice. One well-known work in particular came to mind, and it's one that is so well-known, in fact, that Richard refers to it directly without mentioning it by name. Regarding the capricious, Richard writes, and I'm quoting him, "It captured the inventive spirit of each art in turn. The connections it sketched between poetry, music, and painting tended to take the form of parallels, suggesting that, and here comes the punchline, that as it capriciously was in painting, so it was in poetry. Clearly, Horace's ut pictura poesis, minus the decisive adverb capriciously, because the word caprice and its derivatives, Richard teaches us, are of early modern vintage, even if the Latin for goat, caper, figures somehow in its evolution. What's more, there is no Latin equivalent for caprice, at least not that I could think of. And yet Horace's lacking the word does not mean he lacked the concept. With it or without it, his Ars Poetica is a study in capriciousness as it capers from topic to topic, changing direction without warning, flouting generic conventions, and challenging readers with colloquial turns of phrase that no dictionary can straighten out. Like the characters in a Dryden play, and like Richard himself, Horace encourages the free flow of new foreign words as long as they receive the blessing of usage. Long before Strauss writes Capriccio, his opera about writing opera, Horace writes a poem about writing poetry. And like the capricious works of art that Richard analyzes so astutely, the Ars Poetica is self-consciously full of contradictions. Chief among them is one that figures prominently in Richard's story of Caprice, namely its identification with ingenuity, Horace's ingenium, over and against the rules of art. Horace famously begins and ends his verse epistle with witty portraits of poets who, relying on their native talents, go off the rails because they lack art, while his own poem is nothing if not a monument to capricious genius. Complete with goats and goat songs, the Ars Poetica could be the poster child for Richard's terrific chapter. And this, in my view, is the sure sign of a successful book. And here I'm going to repeat something that I think Michael alluded to a moment ago. For me, the successful book sets our minds in motion. It gives us the fuel to meander in our own individual ways to a strangely familiar there from a defamiliarized, or to use Frédérique's word a few minutes ago, a strange here. Reminding us in closing that we have been here before, Richard has actually offered us a wonderfully inventive, innovative backstory for imagining the next chapter of what he calls our common life.
Friends and colleagues, thank you ever so much for those wonderful words, which I'm really touched by. There's so much to say in response that I can only promise to have taken copious notes and to have been set quite a few years of new work along the lines set in motion, perhaps in the first instance by the book and the lecture, but also by this conversation. I'm going to circle back in conclusion to Michael who brought Cléo de 5 à 7 into our transhistorical conversation, and one of Agnès Varda's early films. It was a nice way of connecting your thinking, Michael, with the film that you've just seen, since Alan found a way of, you'll have noticed in an early scene, naming Agnès Varda as a particular influence on his work. I think that you see her above the Tyneside cinema as Alan makes his way onto the train to come down to Durham to record the film. So that's a way of bringing Alan back into the frame of this conversation. This conversation would not have happened without the work he did to translate my caprices into filmic ones. I think Frédérique is right that, of course, that the caprice these days is often, yes, used belittlingly of children who want something they can't really have. And I think that I am the child who wanted something they couldn't really have, insofar as I hoped to have a round table conversation in which we would come together and celebrate the pleasures and the value of scholarly conversation. I had the caprice, but you have realised it by your words and by your willingness to contribute to this conversation. So as the bells toll, I think they are telling us that we are going to need to bring this to the conclusion, which can only be obviously the serving of supper, or perhaps a cup of tea, depending on your time zone, or possibly even something stronger. So thank you all, and good night. Alan?
Yes.
I have stopped.